Hello, my name is Marie Montanona Milton, and thank you for having me here today. I'm going to be bringing a different perspective to the symposium. As you can see, it's from the cancer caregiver's perspective. Not only am I a nurse, and I had no background in oncology at all until my mother got stomach cancer, but I also became her caregiver. I think it's hard for many of us to talk about what we see as a caregiver. I think it's a delicate subject because we're not the ones fighting the fight. We're not in the actual battle face to face. And I think that when we're able to care for someone that goes through this journey through time, we start to look back and say, I could have done this better. Or I really did this well, I would really like to share it with someone. And that's what I went through, and that's what I wanted to go through today. Today I wanted to focus on the caregiver so that you can continue to give your best to your loved one. And I'll go through this first with some background and why this is an important subject, and on my journey that I hope will bring you some solace and direction. There are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. Every one of these scenarios will apply to every one of us in this room. There's no exception. Rosalind Carter, the former President Jimmy Carter's wife, knew what she was talking about. So much so that she developed the first of its kind, a professional program that focuses on caregivers in Georgia. I had the honor to see her at a symposium where a lot of caregivers came together internationally, formal ones as well, for instance, doctors, nurses, social workers, coming together to learn about initiatives for caregivers. I was on a mission, so to speak, to understand why is it that the healthcare system not talk about the heavy impact this has on the other person in the room, specifically in cancer. I won't go over the specific parts too much, but I will go over some information on cancer caregivers, tips and examples to carry home with you that I hope for one day, whatever period in time, wherever you are on the cancer trajectory. I hope this helps you take care more of yourself as a caregiver. What is a caregiver? In literature, you'll see 2 definitions, formal and informal. Formal, doctors, nurses, social workers, people that are paid, that take care of patients. Informal are like you and me, relatives, friends, unpaid, that provide care for the chronically ill. So why should we talk about caregivers? There will be more than 1 million people diagnosed with cancer for 2018. And we know by research that a majority of these people will be cared for by an informal caregiver, and creating this patient-caregiver dyad, so it's all hand in hand. There's also been a shift of care from the hospital to the home front due to advances in treatment, early detection, and a decline in cancer mortality, so people are living longer. It's a great thing. Cancer caregivers also have multiple roles. We know about those. Help navigate the health system, financial assistance. They also help with medical management and wound care. As a result, they suffer from health problems. These can be financial problems, depression, anxiety, marital strain. This matters because not only does it impact the caregiver, but studies show it directly impacts the patient as well. Do I hit it again? No. Before I started my story, I wanted to go over why each story is so different, and Mary Margaret's probably very familiar with this Yerkes Dodson model, but I felt it was important to explain from this point of view. We know cancer caregivers have a lot to juggle. We usually label this as caregiver strain, stress, or burden. We tend to talk about stress like it's always bad, when it's not always bad. Not enough stress makes us underinvolved. You see the gentleman on the left side sleeping. He's unengaged, lacks motivation. And so the performance level is just not high. And on the right side of the hill, you see someone overwhelmed. They can't concentrate. There's too much going on. And right in the middle, that's like the sweet spot, they say. That's when you have enough stress pushing you so that you're more engaged. As you can see, too low is not too good, too high is not so good. You need some stress to stay motivated and function. Here's another illustration of the same model. I just like the 3 lines on it because it makes me feel like this is what cancer caregivers go through. We go through all three of those things. Studies show that we spike in every area, which makes it a little different than other caregiving. The blue line, as you can see, there's cancer up front, and I like to relate this to recurrence. Critical times happen. We got a lot going on at home. And so we perform really well, but we realize once, as it keeps going on, we don't perform well through time. So you see that decline in that line. The purple line, I like to see that as like a more friendly approach to stress. It's a little bit more predictable. It's okay, we perform. The green line, something more easier. We can kind of predict what's going on as well. So think of wound care. A nurse is helping us out through time. We're not too worried. She's not gone yet. She's about to leave. So our stress builds up some, and then we perform well at the end. Based on the many stress levels that cancer caregivers experience, it's important to recognize that you're at risk. Recognize you will deal with these different levels of stress. Recognize how performance can be impacted, and like I said, recognize that you are at risk. A great example I like to bring up to other caregivers when they say, they're fine, I'm fine, they're fighting the fight. I'm fine. Is that it becomes, they're on cycle number 4, my loved one's feeling horrible, I can skip lunch. This becomes, they're having another procedure, I can skip sleep. They've been suffering too much. This becomes, they're in a recurrence, I don't need to see the doctor right now, that can wait. The problem is this also merges into other parts of your life. I can't go to the movies with you because I can't fit that in my schedule. And you see how this can impact your health. I did the same thing. I avoided a lot of things along the way, but I also learned a lot as well. In response to this, there have been a lot of initiatives that have been done. We have valid and reliable tools to assess cancer caregivers. We also have interventions in place, caregiver programs, therapies, support groups, which I highly encourage. We also have, you'll see educational programs offered on symptom care and skills management. I am here today because I was the caregiver of my mother, Chong Dubler. She immigrated from Daegu, South Korea in 1968. She was a seamstress for 20 years. She had 3 daughters. She was a wife, a sister, a mother, and a grandmother. She led a pretty quiet life. She loved to laugh. She was tough as nails. In 2007, she was suspected of having cancer, which was later verified that she did. She was 58 years old. She immediately started aggressive treatments. She was diagnosed with stage 4 with an inoperable tumor that had about 90% of her stomach. Throughout this journey, she endured chemotherapy, several procedures, clinical trials, HIPEC, and radiation. And this is me beside my mom. She would be so mad at me if she saw these pictures up there, but this is our story. I was the caregiver, and I was given the honor to care for my mom for the 8 years that she battled cancer. I'm also married. I have 2 boys who today are 13 and 15, but when she was diagnosed, they were both toddlers. I've been a nurse today for 18 years. Because of this experience with my mom, I work now in medical oncology at Baptist MD Anderson in Jacksonville, Florida, where I also am completing an internship. I'm developing cancer caregiver initiatives for our nursing department with the aim to decrease caregiver strain through the nursing process. I also volunteer in our community with a focus on other caregiver initiatives. And as I mentioned earlier, I was a primary caregiver for a person with stomach cancer. During this journey, I have never worked or known anything about stomach cancer like I mentioned earlier, and definitely not about what the millions of other patients and caregivers endure. My journey, if we had enough time, we could all share our stories. There are so many stories out there that have meant so much and that carry so much. Throughout this presentation, you'll notice 3 themes. The 3 themes: recognize, recharge, and remember. We need to recognize that there are risks and challenges in caregiving. We need to recharge by taking care of ourselves. And we need to remember who we are and why we are here. My story begins with life before a diagnosis. My mother recently became a widow prior to being diagnosed, and I became her significant other, so to speak. She had many risk factors, ulcers for several years. She suffered from depression. She was Korean, she was Asian. She smoked for 20 plus years. During that time, she lived in Texas and I lived in Louisiana. I was a breadwinner as my husband was still in school at the time. I was a full-time nurse, and again, my 2 boys were little. They were 4 and 5 years old. I didn't live near any family, so I was pretty much used to the semi-balanced life as a working mother, full-time working mother. Life was life. We were pretty much sailing through it with some challenges, but life was life. Life at diagnosis, we all remember that moment. We may maybe forget everything else around that, or sort of, but we remember that moment. She was initially diagnosed. She visited me, and she got diagnosed in Shreveport, Louisiana. During that time, my mom moved in, and we became a blended family. And I had a career change like millions of other caregivers around the world. What went from one job became 4 jobs. I had to meet my mother's treatment schedule and also the household finances. I did have a supportive employers that helped me make my hours and meet my schedule. Be transparent with your employers. Communicate your needs. Let them know, and usually they will work with you. She was given a 3-month prognosis. We had several talks about advanced care planning. I was fortunate because my mother had her living will in place. She knew how important this was, especially after my stepdad had died not too long before she was diagnosed. I can't stress that out enough. If you don't have advanced care planning in place, it doesn't mean you've given up. But it's something every one of us should have, whether we're healthy or not, ill or not. Cancer is hard and it's unpredictable. Life during the journey. My mom and I decided on a cancer treatment center. You learn along the way that it's okay to get a second opinion. Talk with other patients and caregivers. You will learn about other procedures done and the clinical trials, which we talked about earlier. After we established our doctor and treatment center, what we learned was make friends with your nutritionist. I learned that later on when my mom had radiation, and she kind of gave me a bunch of examples. There's a cultural competency thing that a lot of nutritionists have to do with me, because I'm like, I've got this, and this product, and it's not exactly macaroni and cheese and milk, you know? And so I would bring the product or take a picture of the nutritional value on the back and explain to them, this is what my mom likes to eat. How do we work with this? Also know your PCP. This is so important for both the caregiver and patient. For the caregiver, your PCP for your loved one, your primary care physician, they're the ones that help take care of the rest of your body. They're their other team member at home. They go in hand with your whole oncology team. And for the caregiver, you need to know your PCP. A lot of the time, and we know this, that's why we're here today with Debbie's Dream Foundation, physicians in other areas don't really understand these dynamics that happen in oncology. If they understand your situation up front, they'll know your baseline. They'll know what's going on, and you won't be so new coming in, just pouring out, and them not really understanding that. So know your PCP. Throughout the journey, there was tons of traveling. My mother first lived with me for a few years in Louisiana. We were located in Florida, later when my husband graduated from school, finally. And because of clinical trials, my mom had to return back to Texas. Thus began long-distance caregiving. Again, she was a widow, and I was the only family member that could meet her needs and do symptom management. So I flew between 2 states for the following 6 years. I basically had 2 homes. And how did I feel during all of this? I felt like most cancer caregivers. It's important to recognize these symptoms. These usually are a sign that we need rest or we need to take a break. Anxious and worried, especially during scans. Headaches and insomnia. When the scan is over, what if it doesn't work? There's a whole list, but sometimes there's no one solution. Sometimes there's simply no solution. She won't eat or digest her food. She can't tolerate the treatment. I miss my kids. Sometimes there's no solution. It's important to recognize your symptoms. Recognize when you're getting frustrated, angry, or if you're in burnout. Again, these are signs that you need help and you need to take a break. These are signs that you need to recharge. Remember the spikes of stress. Can't have too much of that if you want to function well for your loved one. So I mentioned what's being done in the U.S. We can be charged through Caregiver Programs. I know Duke has one. I didn't go on UNC's site, but a lot of NCI-designated cancer centers do offer these. I highly recommend them. They usually are multi-component. They offer like therapy. They'll call you up, support groups. Take walks during those anxiety-ridden breaks when you're waiting on scans. Cancer centers usually have those meditation spaces or, beautiful gardens, and I wish I looked at those when I was waiting long, but they do help during those periods in time. And talk with someone who understands. So what did I do as my role as a caregiver? I did some things I enjoyed. I volunteered at my kids' schools. When I'd come back in town, I'd merge into their lives and pop my head in their classrooms and taught their phonics classes. I wanted to be close to them. I also spent time with my mom. She loved fishing, and she loved grocery shopping. She loved to look at the produce section. And so we went around there a lot. And innovative ways in caregiving, cooking new recipes. I bought her so many new devices. But you know what the problem is here? Even though these are helpful because they do help that bond in spending time with your loved one and your children, this is not something specifically caring for me. These are not examples aimed only at self-care for me. So what did self-care look like for me? And so I look back on that time and I saw that I practiced some short-term goals. And these are not going to solve life mysteries or all of the problems. Again, sometimes there is no best solution. But these are the things that help me take care of myself and relieve those symptoms, decrease burnout, and help my performance stay high. Music. I love playing music, the piano. I had a big old piano in Florida, and then I bought a keyboard at my mom's house, put some earphones in when she didn't want to hear it, and I'd play that about 20, 30 minutes a day. Exercise. My mom sometimes felt insecure during some cycles, so I wouldn't leave during the day. I'd leave in the morning. Spoke on the phone with friends, spent time with friends. I went back to school online to get my graduate degree. What do you notice? These are not only goals, but they are realistic goals. Work with your environment. Those are my children when they were little. Some tips I learned along the way. Again, do things realistic to your needs, not just what someone else told you or what you read in literature, although those can be helpful. Skype. My kids, I helped them with homework on Skype. I did a caregiver calendar, I like to call it that. If my kid's birthday was, say, on January 9th, I sang to them on January 9th, but no one was going to eat cake till Mom got back in town, so we would do their birthday like January 15th. Same with Christmas. We missed so many holidays with our family, but we did not celebrate them until they knew it could work in. Have a backup plan, a lifeline. If I left Florida, my family had a backup, a second, a third line. When I left my mom, there was a second and third line in place. Do what works for your situation. Do what works around your schedule. Make it realistic. Here are some tips as a nurse. Don't assume that we know. If we don't see it, we're just going to assume you're just fine. Ask if there are services, FMLA. Are you applicable for short-term disability? Can you afford to stay in radiation? I know we had 2 months of radiation and I had to stay in a hotel, and it can be very expensive. Can you afford the clinical trials? Our oncologist was really good about saying, this is what you can expect from this. This is how often you'll have to leave. Can you afford it? See if there are services and organizations that can help pay for that. And usually there's someone on the team. You can ask your nurse, and she usually knows someone in there that will ask. But again, if you don't ask, they're going to assume you're just fine. And join the team in decision making. Learn the disease and treatment. Usually you can contact a pharmacist, and they're really good about going through that with you and have a lot of time to go through those different phases. I'm on cycle 3, and is this normal? Ask your oncologist. We're so used to this person being sick so much that sometimes I think we just assume this is normal, but they still need to know what's going on. Let us know how we can help. Communicate with your team. Usually they'll try to accommodate with your schedule. And also keep a journal. You will forget. It'll help keep you on track. And again, keep in contact with your primary care physician, and always know it's okay to get a second opinion. And last but certainly not least, remember who you are, remember why you are here. This is a picture of my mom and me, one in the pink jacket. I was 19 years old, I was in college. She was cooking, and she hated it when I'd stick her on my back. She was little. She was like 4'10", 70-some pounds her whole life, so I don't know why I found it hilarious. I would just throw her on my back and walk around, and she'd laugh hysterically. And this last one was about 1.5 years before she left us, and she couldn't wake up hardly that day. She was really fatigued, and so I was like, oh, Mom, just get on my back. I was like, you want to walk outside? And she's like, no. And so I looked in the mirror, and that's us laughing in the mirror, because we look crazy. You are here for that person and not for the cancer, but you're helping them fight the fight. Don't forget self-care. They need you to take care of yourself, whether you or they know it or not. I'm here to remind you that you're at risk. You will endure challenges. There are ways to keep on the surface and not drown. I'm also here to tell you, you will drown. You will need help. You will make mistakes. Sometimes there's simply not an answer. This is my mom in hospice care during her last days. We celebrated her birthday. She turned 66 a few weeks before she left us. I wish the story was different. There are many success stories, and I wish this one was different. But I came here today to tell you my story as a caregiver. Make the most of every moment. What did I see? We never skipped a beat, but I certainly could have taken better care of myself. So I wanted to end this with a rainbow. This is my mom and me. This is the year I graduated from grad school. She was able to see me walk. That's the same year. She died a few weeks after that. And it was one of those short-term goals that I met, and she was able to see that. Remember to never lose hope. Again, this is my story, and I hope that wherever you are in the spectrum of caregiving, that there is always success. Caregivers, remember why you are here. Remember to take care of yourself. Remember it takes a team. You were never meant to do this alone. Remember to never lose hope, but most of all, remember the person. Thank you.
Are there any questions in the audience for Marie? We actually had one come in during the webcast, on the webcast, Marie. If you could share, you mentioned your mom was on clinical trials. If you could share how you sought those out or how they were brought to you as a family?
Our oncologist was really great. When I look back and think of what I went through, he was really great about saying, you know, this is what is to be expected. These are the symptoms we're seeing so far. So I really didn't have to prompt a lot of questions. It was easier being a nurse. I kind of knew the questions to ask. What can I expect at this length of time? We're doing echo for why again? And it's easy to forget why you're doing that echo. It's so easy to forget why, you know, is this the one that affects your sight? Because it can compress your, you know, it can affect, which one is it? You kind of lose yourself. And so I have to say, I have to give the credit to my oncologist. He was very proactive in giving us the information up front. And again, I just had a really informative team.
And was there any times that you had researched second opinions or some of the things that we've heard today that patients and caregivers were encouraged to do? Did you have any experience with that?
It's really, from what I've read, it's going to you, Mary Margaret, therapy. So mostly, and again, when I'm going over, it's generally for the oncology patient population. I was focusing more on the outpatient cancer population. Like I mentioned earlier, we're transitioning care. It's more into the outpatient domain. Pediatrics has its domain in literature, spouse and patient. However, there are a lot of psychologists in those facilities will offer it for both the caregiver and the patient. So you want to bring that up. As far as organization, you may not know that they have those programs. I know Sloan Kettering, the National Cancer Institute designated cancer centers, they have like, I think 7 top, they call them exemplar. And they have the multi-component approaches. So you might have virtual support groups online, someone that can call, a professional that they scheduled online that will talk with you, therapy, and educational classes. So again, you got to be proactive about it. In our healthcare system, it's fee-for-based. Hopefully soon it'll be value-based care where they'll value more of the family and bring those services there. In the meantime, you need to be proactive and search them out yourself. And hopefully, and that's what my project is doing, is trying to focus on nurses having to bring it up so that we can have distress screenings. Cancer patients, NCCN guidelines have distress screenings that they want patients to have. And so they're trying to do caregiver distress screenings as well now that they see that caregivers do suffer from these complications.